My name is Jenna Cross. I was 33 the night my father handed me an envelope meant to be the end of me. It was my sister Paige's wedding. 300 guests. A lakeside estate strung with lights that scattered across the water like loose change. The band played something slow. Paige stood 12 feet away in imported lace, a glass of champagne in one hand, watching me the way you watch a scene you already know the ending to. My father crossed the reception floor holding a cream envelope, sealed in wax with his own initials pressed into it. He handed it to me at my table, in front of 6 strangers, and told me to open it whenever I was ready. I opened it right there. 2 typed pages. Legal phrasing, tangled up with old grievances. The final line told me I was no longer a cross in any way that mattered. Paige's smile widened. She was waiting for tears. She was waiting for me to shove my chair back and give 300 people something to gossip about on the drive home. What none of them knew was this: 3 weeks before my father sealed that envelope, I had already signed something that would append everything they thought belonged to them. Welcome to her side of the story, where we tell the stories of women who chose dignity over drama and boundaries over bitterness. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stay with me. Subscribe before we go further, because this one has a turn you won't see coming. My mother was Jenna Cross. She died of pancreatic cancer when I was 14. That's the short version. The long version is that she spent 9 months shrinking in a hospital bed, while my father rearranged his office, furniture and scheduled client dinners. She asked him to bring her sketchbook. He brought flowers. Eventually she stopped asking for anything at all. Eleanor co-founded Cross Development Group in 1997, 40% ownership, and a drafting table she'd bought secondhand. She designed the first 3 commercial projects that put the company on the map. My father sold them. That was always the arrangement. She built, he talked. 2 weeks after her funeral, I found him clearing her closet suits into garbage bags, jewelry into a shoebox marked for donation. I stood in the doorway and watched him fold her whole life into black plastic. But he missed something. Tucked behind a stack of old blueprints on her top shelf was a small cedar box with brass hinges. It smelled like her closet: cedar, old paper, and the faint trace of lavender sachets she kept in her drawers. Inside was a handwritten letter, addressed to me. Jenna, everything I built so you'd never have to beg. Remember that, when they tell you what you deserve. I was 14. I thought it was just something mother said. I kept the box. I kept the letter. I didn't turn it over and read the back for 19 years. That was my first mistake. Or maybe it was my mother's only secret. 11 months after she died, my father brought Denise Hargrove home for dinner. She was the company's bookkeeper. She'd known my mother. She'd sat in the second row at the funeral, dry-eyed. The only person there who didn't cry. I remember that specifically. Denise moved in by spring. By summer, she'd reorganized the whole house. My mother's reading chair went to the garage. Her framed prints came off the walls. The bedroom she and my father shared became Denise's yoga studio within 6 months. I found my parents' wedding photo in the recycling bin on a Tuesday morning, wedged between a cereal box and junk mail. I wiped the coffee off the glass and carried it to my room without a word. Denise noticed. She knocked on my door that evening, sat on the edge of my bed, put a hand on my shoulder. Your mother would have wanted your father to be happy, she said. Don't make this about you. I was 15. I didn't have the vocabulary for what I felt, but something in her voice didn't match something in her eyes. She was performing comfort like a song she'd rehearsed but never actually felt. The reorganizing continued. Within a year, my mother's name came off the lobby wall at the company. Her drafting table was donated to a community college. Her design awards got boxed and shoved into the attic. Denise called it making space for the future. I called it erasure, but I was 15 and nobody asked what I called it. Paige was born the year I turned 16. By June, the nursery had custom wallpaper that cost more than my school supplies for the entire year. By September, my father was telling dinner guests about our new beginning, as if the first 30 years of his life had just been a rough draft. Paige grew up in a completely different family than the one I remembered. Private school, dance lessons, a car at 16 with a bow on the hood. Summer internships arranged through my father's contacts. Tuition paid without a single conversation about cost. I watched from the edges, waitressing after school, borrowing textbooks, eating ramen upstairs while the family ate downstairs. Not because anyone locked me out, because Denise only ever sat 3 places at the table and said I preferred eating alone. Paige wasn't cruel, that matters, and I want to be fair about it. She was 10 the first time she asked Denise why I always looked angry at family things. Denise smoothed her hair and said, "Because she chose to leave us, sweetheart." Paige believed it. Why wouldn't she? She was a child raised on a version of history written entirely by the people it benefited. There's one moment I've turned over 100 times since. Paige was 12. It was the last Thanksgiving I'd attend for years. She found me alone at the sink while everyone else watched football. "Jenna," she said, "how come you're never in the family photos?" I opened my mouth, closed it, smiled. "Guess I'm always the one holding the camera." She nodded and walked off. She was 12. She didn't know the camera was a lie. I left the day after my 18th birthday. 1 suitcase, a scholarship letter from the state engineering program, the cedar box wedged between 2 sweaters. My father stood in the kitchen doorway with his coffee and said, "Walk out that door. Don't expect anything from this family again." I walked out the door. 15 years. That's how long it took to build a life out of 1 suitcase. I studied structural engineering because I liked the math of load-bearing walls. How much weight something could hold before it cracked. I worked construction every summer. I read blueprints the way other people read novels. Every line was a wall I built for myself. By 25, I was a project manager at a commercial firm outside Charlotte. By 28, I was managing hospital expansions and mixed-use developments, worth tens of millions. I earned every bit of it, every client, every late night at my kitchen table checking steel specs. I never once called home for money, a reference, anything. That felt like strength at the time. It took me a long time to understand it was also a wound. I carried everything alone because trusting people felt like handing them a knife and pointing at the soft spot. Grace Holloway was the one exception. We met freshman year in a calculus study group. She became an estate attorney. I became an engineer. We stayed close the way people do after they've watched each other bomb an exam and eat cold pizza at 2 a.m. Grace was the only person who knew the whole story of my family. She never told me to forgive them. She never told me to forget, either. She just said once, over pad thai on a random Friday, "Jenna, you're the most competent person I know, and the loneliest." She wasn't wrong about either. The first crack showed up on a Tuesday in October. I was 32, finally with enough saved for a down payment on a condo, a 2-bedroom in a converted mill building. Good light, good bones, the kind of place I'd spent my career building for other people. The loan officer called back within 48 hours. His voice careful, rehearsed. "Ms. Cross, we're unable to approve your application. There are some items on your credit report that need to be addressed." To home equity lines of credit, $180,000 total. Opened when I was 16 and 17. Tied to properties owned by Cross Development Group. My name. My social security number. My date of birth. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and read the printout 3 times. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. $180,000 of debt I never signed for. Tied to buildings I'd never lived in. Funding a life I'd never been part of. I called Grace. She picked up on the second ring. I read her the numbers. She went quiet for 5 full seconds, an eternity, coming from a lawyer. "Jenna," she said finally. "They stole your identity." Literally, both lines had opened while I was still a minor, living under my father's roof. Before I ever packed a suitcase, before I ever walked out that door, they had already turned me into collateral. "What do?" I asked. "You let me pull records," she said. "And then we find out what else they took." Grace found the trust on a Thursday. She'd started with the credit lines and traced them back through county property filings. Cross Development Group owned 9 commercial properties across 3 counties. My mother's name appeared on the original filings for 7 of them. Conor, designer, cosigner. After her death, Every filing suddenly listed Walter Cross as sole owner. The transfer had been recorded under an executive decree signed by my father and filed by the family's longtime attorney. But Grace kept digging. 3 layers deep in the county's digital archive, she found a separate filing, a testamentary trust established by Eleanor Cross in 2005, a year before her diagnosis, filed with an independent estate attorney in a different county entirely. One beneficiary named Jenna Cross. The asset, 40% ownership of Cross Development Group. Activation date, my 30th birthday. I was 32. That trust should have activated 2 years earlier. As executor of my mother's estate, my father was legally required to notify me. He never did. He never even filed it with probate. He buried it the way Denise buried the drafting table, quietly, with a donation receipt and a clean conscience. Grace called me at 9:14 that night. Jenna, your mother left you 40% of that company. In a trust. Your father suppressed it for 19 years. I sat down on my kitchen floor. The tile was cold under my legs. I thought about the cedar box on my nightstand, the letter inside it, a sentence I'd read 100 times but never actually heard. Everything I built so you'd never have to beg. The wedding invitation arrived on a Saturday in March. Thick cream cardstock, gold foil, Paige Cross and Nathan Reed. A lakeside estate in the foothills. 300 guests. Black tie optional, which in my father's world meant black tie mandatory. I stood at my kitchen counter and did the math. Venue alone, $60,000 to $80,000 for the weekend. Catering for 300. A live band, imported flowers, a custom cake from a bakery that charged by the tier. Call it $280,000. Conservative. I thought about the credit lines opened in my name. About the trust my father buried. About the 40% of a company that should have funded my mother's legacy, and instead funded my sister's wedding. I called Grace. Paige is getting married. Lakeside estate, 300 people. Grace was quiet a beat. You should go. Why? Because everything they spend is about to become part of the financial picture, and because you should see it. I looked at the RSVP card. April 15th. I circled it. That same week, Grace filed 2 documents. First, a trust activation affidavit with the surrogate court, formally naming me sole beneficiary of my mother's testamentary trust. Second, an identity theft complaint with the state attorney general's office, documenting the 2 home equity lines opened in my name without consent. Both were accepted. Both got case numbers. I signed the affidavit on a Wednesday morning before work. Steady hand. A cheap ballpoint pen from my desk drawer. 4 pages. My father's disownment letter would come in at 2, but I didn't know that yet. I mailed my RSVP that afternoon. Attending, Grace spread 19 years of corporate filings across her dining room. Table 1 Sunday. It covered every inch. Manila folders, printed PDFs, yellow sticky notes, marking discrepancies. The timeline was surgical. 2006. Eleanor Cross dies. My father files an executive decree claiming full ownership of Cross Development Group, 2007. Denise Hargrove marries my father. 2 months later, she's listed as company bookkeeper with signatory authority. 2008. First home equity line opened in my name, $62,000. Secured against a commercial property my mother had designed. 2009. Second line, bringing the total to $180,000. I was 17, waitressing on weekends, studying for the SAT 2010 through 2025. My mother's name, systematically removed from every corporate document. Company rebranded from Eleanor Cross Design Associates to Cross Development Group. Website updated. Lobby plaque replaced. Awards moved to storage. Grace laid it out like a case, because it was one. Trust suppression. Identity theft. Breach of fiduciary duty. Fraudulent executive filings. The trust activation is straightforward, she said. Surrogate court will honor it. Your father was legally required to notify you at 30, and he didn't. That's settled law. The credit lines the AG will investigate. You were a minor. Your father had access to your social as your legal guardian, and he used it. That's a felony in most states. How long until he knows? The AG sends a preliminary inquiry within 60 days. We filed in early April. The wedding's late May. She paused. He'll find out after. I nodded. That was enough. Denise's manipulation was never loud, and that's exactly what made it work. She didn't threaten. She rearranged reality one small detail at a time. The way you pull stitches from a hem slowly, until the whole garment falls apart and nobody remembers it was ever whole. My chair missing at holiday dinners. Oh, I thought you weren't coming. Family portraits taken without me. You were in the bathroom, sweetie, we couldn't wait. The light was going. Christmas cards sent to 200 contacts every December, signed by 3 names that didn't include mine. She told the women at her church I'd estranged myself. Our oldest chose to leave. We pray for her every Sunday. She told Paige my mother had been difficult and my father had sacrificed everything. She told my father I was angry, unstable, just like Eleanor. A drip campaign that ran for 19 years, and the disownment letter was her masterpiece. I learned that part later, through Nathan. It was Denise's idea. Denise's language. Denise's timing the reception. 300 guests, maximum audience. A formal letter gives the family closure, she told my father. She won't make a scene at Paige's wedding. She's too proud. She was right about the pride. She was wrong about what proud people do when they're cornered. They don't cry. They don't run. They count exits. She'll always be Eleanor's daughter, not ours. That's what Denise told my father the night before the wedding. Nathan overheard it through a hotel wall. My father was never the architect. My mother was. I didn't understand that as a kid. I grew up watching him shake hands at ribbon cuttings, stand in front of buildings with his name on the sign. He looked like the man who built them. He had the suits, the handshake, the voice. But the designs were my mother's. The first 3 projects that made the company's reputation: a medical office park, a waterfront mixed-use building, a boutique hotel that won a regional award, all came off her drafting table. Her sketches, her structural math, graph paper, and a mechanical pencil at midnight. My father sold. He was genuinely brilliant at it. But without her designs, he was just a handshake standing on an empty lot. I remember a dinner party when I was 12. A client's wife leaned over and told me, "Your mom's the real brains of this operation, you know?" She meant it kindly. My father's face went somewhere darker than anger, exposed. Like someone had pulled back a curtain and the audience could suddenly see the machinery. 3 months after she died, he hired a PR firm and rebranded everything. Her name off the website, the letterhead, the awards page. The company had always shown up publicly as Cross Development Group, but on the original incorporation papers, internally, it had been Eleanor Cross Design Associates. He changed that too. He wasn't just hiding a trust. He was hiding the fact that everything he owned had been built by a woman he'd spent 19 years erasing. And I was the living reminder. Her jaw, her handwriting, her habit of going quiet until the math was finished. No wonder he wanted me gone. Paige invited me dress shopping in April. The first invitation with no strings attached that I'd gotten from her in 8 years. I went, not because I wanted to watch her try on gowns funded by money that should have been mine, but because Grace told me to keep things smooth until the filings cleared. Don't give them a reason to suspect anything. The bridal salon sat in a converted warehouse, high ceilings, champagne on arrival. Denise was already there in a velvet chair, legs crossed, looking like she owned the building. Paige tried on 7 dresses and looked beautiful in every one. I won't pretend otherwise. When she came out in a hand-bited gown with a cathedral train, even the saleswoman went quiet. The dress cost $14,000. Denise handed over a credit card. The saleswoman swiped it. The receipt printed. Paige hugged her mother. Denise smoothed the receipt flat on the counter and walked toward the door. I glanced at the receipt. Visa last 4 digits, 7,741. I recognized them immediately. The card tied to the second home equity line. The one opened in my name at 17. $118,000 of debt I never authorized, being used to buy a wedding dress. I took my phone out and photographed the receipt. The saleswoman glanced over. Just keeping a memory, I said. $14,000 on a card built from my social security number. for a dress I'd never wear, at a wedding I wasn't meant to survive. I sent the photo to Grace that night. She replied with one word: noted. The rehearsal dinner was the night before, at a restaurant the venue recommended. Private room, a jazz trio, 40 people. I was seated at the far end between a groomsman I'd never met and Nathan's Gretend, who mostly talked to her bread roll. My father stood for a toast. Bourbon in hand, he talked about family, loyalty, bonds that distance and disagreement can't break. He looked straight at me. Some people earn their place in a family, he said. Others walk away and expect it to still be waiting. A murmur moved through the room. A few eyes drifted my way. Denise squeezed his hand and looked down at her plate with a modest, martyred expression. Nathan's jaw tightened across the table. I sipped my water, smiled at the groomsman, asked about his drive up from Atlanta. The moment passed. After dinner, in the hallway near the restrooms, I heard voices around the corner before I saw them. Denise and Paige. Tomorrow, your father takes care of it, Denise was saying. She won't make a scene, are you sure? Paige's voice was smaller than I expected. What if she's too proud to cry in public. Trust me, she'll read it. She'll leave. That'll be the end of it. I stood still, counted to 5, then rounded the corner and walked past them without a word. Denise straightened. Paige looked at her shoes. I washed my hands, dried them, went back to the table and finished my water. The night before the wedding, alone in my room, at the inn attached to the estate, I could hear catering trucks arriving. A generator being tested, someone laughing down on the dock. I opened the cedar box. I'd carried it through every apartment, every city, every fresh start for 19 years. The brass hinges had tarnished. The wood had darkened. But when I lifted the lid, the smell was the same: cedar and lavender and old paper. My mother's whole closet folded into 6 inches of wood. I read the letter again. The creases had gone soft from handling. The ink faded where my thumb always rested. Everything I built so you'd never have to beg. Remember that, when they tell you what you deserve. Then I turned it over. I'd never once looked at the back, not at 14, not at 18 packing my suitcase, not at 25 or 30 or 32. 100 readings of the front, folded back into the box every time, and I'd never flipped it. On the back, smaller, more deliberate handwriting, like she'd written it separately, a name, a phone number, and 4 words: Margaret Doyle, a number with a different area code than ours. Ask about the trust. She knew. She knew exactly what my father would do, and that Denise would help him do it. She'd written herself a contingency plan in her own hand, and hidden it in a cedar box her daughter would eventually find. I held the letter against my chest. The paper was warm. 19 years late, but I was here. Grace called at 7:45 the morning of the wedding. I was already dressed, navy suit, the cedar box in my handbag. I hadn't slept much. Good news, she said. Surrogate court accepted the trust activation. As of yesterday morning, you're legally recognized as sole beneficiary of Eleanor Cross's testamentary trust. 40% of Cross Development Group is yours, Jenna. It's been yours since your 30th birthday. Your father just never told you, she went on. And the AG opened a preliminary investigation. Identity theft complaint, the forged executive filings, the credit records, all of it. Your father gets an inquiry letter early next week. I looked out the window at the lake, flat and silver, chairs already lining up on the lawn in neat rows. Whatever happens today, Grace said, you've already won on paper. It was never about the paper, I told her. She was quiet a moment. One more thing. I traced the forged executive affidavit, the one that suppressed the trust. The notary stamp belongs to Denise Hargrove Cross. She filed it. I closed my eyes. My father signed it. Denise built it. She was the bookkeeper. She knew where every document lived. I thanked Grace, hung up, and packed my phone next to the cedar box. Time to go to a wedding. If you've ever found out someone you trusted had been stealing from you in ways you never imagined, you know exactly what that cold, clear knowing feels like. Stay with me. What happened at that wedding was only the beginning. Subscribe if you're still here. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I'll say that plainly, because it was true. The estate sat on a ridge above the lake. White chairs fanned across a manicured lawn, an arch of peonies and eucalyptus. A string quartet working through pachelbel, and then something modern I didn't recognize. 300 guests fanning themselves against the late May heat. I sat in the back row 14, right side, not by choice. Denise had arranged the seating. Family filled the first 4 rows on the left. I was next to an elderly cousin of Denise's, who smelled like lavender. Paige came down the aisle on my father's arm, radiant, the beaded dress scattering sunlight in small white flashes across the lawn. A cathedral veil trailing behind her like a second bride. She was 29 and glowing and had spent her whole life preparing for exactly this. Nathan's eyes watered when he saw her, his hands trembling as he took hers. Whatever else is true about the people around this wedding, Nathan loved her. I could see it in the way his mouth tightened, trying not to cry. Traditional vows, short, a minister from Denise's church. Rings, a kiss, applause. I clapped along with everyone else. The cedar box pressed against my hip through my handbag. Thinking about my mother walking down an aisle 20 years before this one, on the arm of a man who'd spend the next decade erasing her. The reception tent was the size of a small hangar, open on the lakeside, a hardwood floor laid straight over the grass. A 12-piece band that had driven up for the night. Centerpieces that probably cost more than my first month's rent out of college. I was seated at table 19, the furthest one from the head table. The table for the people you have to invite but don't especially want to see. A retired accountant from Nathan's firm, 2 of Paige's sorority sisters glued to their phones through cocktail hour. A couple from Denise's neighborhood who kept asking if I was the other daughter. I ate the salmon, made small talk about real estate and the unseasonable heat. I was halfway through dessert when I saw him stand. My father rose from the head table, said something to Denise, adjusted his jacket, and reached under the table for an envelope, cream, formal. I could see the wax seal from 40 feet away. He crossed the dance floor at the careful pace of a man who's rehearsed a moment and doesn't want to rush it. He arrived at table 19 and stood beside my chair. The retired accountant looked up. The sorority sister stopped scrolling. "Jenna," he said, voice level rehearsed. "I want to give you something. I've been thinking about this a long time." He held the envelope in both hands and extended it. Not a gift. A verdict. Across the room, Denise watched with her hands folded, chin lifted. The band played on. I took the envelope. Wax seal pressed with his initials, WC. I broke it, unfolded 2 pages, and read them in front of 6 people who'd stopped eating entirely. The letter was typed, single-spaced. The first page was legal language, formal severance of familial obligations, dissolution of financial, emotional, and social bonds, effective immediately and irrevocably. It read like a template pulled off the internet, with his own grievances stitched into the margins. The second page was personal, my father's voice unmistakable underneath the typeface. "You abandoned this family 18 years ago. You rejected every opportunity we offered. You chose to be a stranger." A paragraph about how Denise and Paige had built something beautiful without me. A paragraph about how I'd refused to participate in healing. A paragraph invoking my mother, claiming she'd have understood. The last line, centered and bolded, "You are no longer a cross in any meaningful way." I read it twice, not because I needed to understand it, but because I wanted to remember every word. The retired accountant set down his fork. One sorority sister whispered to the other. The neighbors stared at their plates. I looked up. My father stood 3 feet away, jaw tight, hands empty at his sides, waiting. Across the floor, Paige stood with her champagne, watching. Her smile small and expectant, the smile of someone who's been told how the movie ends, and is watching it arrive right on schedule. I folded the letter once, twice, tucked it into my jacket pocket next to the cedar box. "Thank you, Dad," I said. "I'll keep this." He blinked. That's the detail I remember most clearly, not the letter. Not the faces at the table, not Paige's champagne or Denise's folded hands. He blinked, and in that blink I watched an entire rehearsed script collapse. I was supposed to cry. Stand up so fast, the chair scraped the floor. Press a napkin to my eyes and hurry toward the exit, while 300 guests watched and whispered and confirmed every single thing Denise had ever said about me. That was the plan. I could feel it hanging in the air like a note that never resolved. Instead, I smiled, not bitter, not smug, just calm. The kind of smile you give someone when you know something they don't, and you're choosing not to say it yet. Thank you, Dad, I said again. I'll keep this. I stood, walked to the dance floor, and found Nathan's uncle, 72, a retired pharmacist who'd been sitting alone since the second course. I asked if he wanted to dance. He did. The band played something slow. We moved in a small, easy circle while he told me about his garden, his late wife, a hydrangea that bloomed blue every June no matter what he did to the soil. Behind me, I could feel my father still standing at table 19, holding nothing. He'd expected tears. I gave him a fold, a jacket pocket, and a waltz. Denise reached him inside a minute. I caught it from the corner of my eye, heels sharp on the hardwood, clutch pressed to her hip, pulling him toward the tent's edge. What happened? Her voice carried more than she meant it to. Did she read it? She read it. She folded it. She put it in her pocket and said thank you. I couldn't hear the rest. The band shifted into something up-tempo, and Nathan's uncle spun me with more enthusiasm than accuracy. When I looked over again, Denise, my father, and Paige were huddled near the bar. 3 heads together, 3 mouths moving fast. I danced with the accountant next, who turned out to have a surprisingly good lead. Complimented the caterer on the salmon. Asked a bridesmaid about the flower arrangements. Warm, present, entirely unbothered, a visible contrast to the knot of tension gathered by the bar. Paige broke off from the group and walked over, champagne in hand, veil dragging across the grass. Jenna, flat, controlled, coached. Congratulations, Paige. The ceremony was lovely. Why are you still here? I looked at her. 29 years old, 4 hours married, standing in a $14,000 dress, bought on a card opened in my name. The band's good, I said. And the salmon was excellent. I danced 3 more songs. She spent all 3 watching. Nathan found me between songs, holding 2 waters, and handed me one without asking. We stood at the railing over the lake as the sun dropped and the string lights took over. Hundreds of them, throwing gold lines across the water. Are you okay? Quiet, direct, the voice of a man who'd seen something wrong and didn't fully understand it yet. I'm fine, Nathan. Congratulations, by the way. You meant every word up there. He half smiled. I did. A pause, turning the glass in his hands. For what it's worth, Paige doesn't know the half of it. About your family, about the money. She thinks it's all just her dad's success. His reputation, his buildings. I know. I've seen the invoices. Jenna, the subcontractor disputes. The way Denise handles the books. Something's not right. I've known since the engagement party. Why didn't you say anything? Because I love her. And because I figured it wasn't my story to tell. He looked out at the lake. I'm sorry. About the letter. About all of it. Don't be sorry. Just be good to her. He nodded and went back inside to find his wife. I stayed at the railing a while longer, listening to the water against the dock. Nathan was decent. That mattered. Paige would need that. I found a bench at the end of the dock, away from the noise, and opened the cedar box again under the stars. The hinges clicked softly. Cedar and lavender rose up, exactly the same after 19 years. I read the front once more, then turned it over and read the back again. Margaret Doyle. Ask about the trust. Mom, I said, out loud, to the lake and the stars and nobody. They erased you from everything. The company, the house, the photographs, the lobby wall. They took your name off the thing you built, and gave it to a man who never drew a single line. The water pushed gently against the dock pilings. But they couldn't erase you from the paperwork. They couldn't erase you from a filing in a county office they never thought to check. One tear slid down my cheek, not for the letter my father gave me, not for the dress or the seat at the back of the room, but for 19 years of a buried name. For a woman who saw all of this coming and left herself a contingency plan in a cedar box for her daughter to eventually find. I wiped my face, closed the lid, and walked back toward the tent. Nothing left to grieve out there. Only something left to finish. Denise caught me in the stone corridor between the tent and the inn, arms crossed, blocking the path exactly the way she used to block doorways when I was a kid. Never with locks, just presence. "You think smiling makes you strong," she said, voice clipped but shaking underneath. "I think the flowers were beautiful, Denise. Don't patronize me. You read that letter. You know what it means. You were never part of this family. I'm aware of what my father wrote." She stepped closer. "Your mother would be ashamed. Don't." I said it the way you close a door, no slam, just the click of a latch. She stopped mid-sentence. Nobody had interrupted her performance in 19 years. She blinked, recalculated, shifted tactics. "This family gave you everything," she said, voice cracking with the effort of holding the character together. "And you gave us nothing." I looked at the woman who'd thrown out my mother's wedding photo, forged an executive affidavit, opened credit cards in my name and used them to fund a wedding. "I gave you my credit score," I said. "You used it well." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You're just like your mother," she finally spat. "Cold, calculating, thinking you're better than everyone. Good night, Denise." I walked past her. She didn't follow. Her heels stayed planted on the stone floor. One click, then silence. I called Grace from the parking lot, gravel crunching underfoot, the music muffled to just bass and a faint saxophone line. "They doubled down," I said, and told her everything. The letter, the hallway, Paige asking why I was still there. "The AG letter goes out Friday," she said when I finished. "Your father should get it Monday, at his office. Standard delivery. Monday, 2 days away." My father would sit at his desk and open an envelope from the state attorney general and learn his company was under preliminary investigation for trust, suppression, and identity theft. "He gave me a letter tonight," I said. "I'd like to give him one Monday. Already drafted. Trust transfer notice. Demand for full credit remediation. Damages claim included. Office or home. Both." Pause. "Both means Denise sees it too." Denise forged the documents. She should see what happens next. "I'll send them first thing Monday," Grace said. "Your mom would be proud, Jenna." I hung up, stood in the lot another minute while the band worked through their last set. Then went back in and found Nathan's uncle for one more dance. Some people wait their whole lives for the moment someone who hurt them finally has to face the truth. Sometimes that truth arrives in an envelope. If your heart's pounding right now, you're not alone. Stay with me. Monday, 9:14 a.m. I know the exact time because Grace had tracking numbers on both deliveries and texted me the second they hit. I was at my own office, third coffee of the morning, reviewing steel specs for a hospital expansion. My phone buzzed twice. Both delivered. Office and home. I set the phone down and went back to the specs. In my father's corner suite in a building my mother had designed. Incidentally, 2 envelopes sat on his desk among the morning mail. His assistant told Nathan later that she noticed his hands when he opened the first one. Envelope 1. The State Attorney General's preliminary inquiry, requesting financial records related to Cross Development Group. Subject: alleged trust suppression, identity theft, breach of fiduciary duty. Envelope 2. From Grace Holloway, attorney at law, on behalf of Jenna Cross. Trust activation notice. Formal demand for transfer of 40% ownership of Cross Development Group per Eleanor Cross's 2005 testamentary trust. Demand for full credit remediation. Demand for restitution, $47,000 in documented damages tied to the unauthorized credit lines. His hands shook, his assistant said. Not anger, something more fundamental. The trembling of 19 years of careful construction shifting under load. He called Denise first. "We have a problem," he called his attorney second. He didn't call me. I finished the hospital specs by noon, ate a sandwich at my desk, made the revisions the steel order needed. The day went on. He called at 4:17 while I was driving home from a site visit. I pulled into a gas station and turned off the engine before answering. Not out of nerves, just because I wanted to be still. "What the hell is this?" "No greeting. You're going to destroy this family over money. You opened home equity lines in my name when I was 16, Dad. Silence. You suppressed Mom's trust for 19 years. Silence. And you handed me a letter at a wedding telling me I'm not family. His breathing turned heavy, ragged, the breathing of a man whose walls are cracking with no blueprint for what comes next. Your mother, he started. My mother built that company, and you erased her. That's not what happened. Eleanor and I were partners. I did what any surviving spouse would do. I maintained. You maintained control. Over her legacy. Over her name. Over your daughter's social security number. He went quiet. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped, stripped of the boardroom polish. If this goes public, we lose everything. The company, the house. Pages, you didn't lose everything when I left at 18. You'll figure it out, Jenna, please. That was the moment. Not the letter at the wedding, not Denise in the hallway. That single word, please, from a man who hadn't asked anyone for anything in 30 years. A man who'd signed a letter disowning his own daughter 3 days earlier, saying please. I want to be honest, it didn't feel like victory. It tasted like metal. Talk to your attorney, Dad. Mine's ready. I hung up, started the car, drove home. Denise called 20 minutes later, must have taken the phone from him. Jenna, please. Same word, different voice, wet with tears that arrive fast and loud when the performance needs urgency. I have nowhere to go if this company fails. Your father and I built this life together. Paige just got married. Think about your sister. I pulled into my parking garage and turned off the engine again. Denise, you forged the executive documents. That was your father's decision. You opened credit cards in my name. You used one linked to a fraudulent home equity line to buy a $14,000 dress. The crying stopped like a faucet turning off. Your mother left because she was selfish, she said, all the warmth gone now, replaced by something cold and cornered. Put work before family. Too busy with her drawings and her buildings to remember she had a husband. Just like you, cold, calculating, thinking you're better than everyone. My mother didn't leave, Denise. She died. Pancreatic cancer, 41 years old, asking for her sketchbook from a hospital bed while her husband scheduled client dinners. She didn't leave. You just told everyone she did. Silence. Then, a sound I'd never heard from her. Not crying, not anger, something between a gasp and a groan. A narrative collapsing under its own weight. My mother put a trust in place because she knew exactly who she'd married. I said, goodbye, Denise. I hung up, sat in the cold parking garage for 10 minutes, under humming fluorescent lights, then went upstairs and made dinner. Paige called 3 days later, a Thursday evening. Her voice was small, not the polished, coached voice from the wedding. This was the voice of someone whose furniture had been rearranged in the dark, and kept bumping into things she didn't expect to find. Nathan told me some things, she said, about the credit cards. A trust, is it true? Did Dad really take out loans in your name? Yes, and Mom left you something. Shares in the company? Yes. Why did nobody ever tell me? I closed my eyes. 29 years of being told I'd abandon the family. 29 years of a comfortable story standing in for an uncomfortable truth. Would you have believed me? I asked. A long pause. I counted to 6. I don't know, she said. That's honest. I respect that. What happens now? The courts decide. There's an investigation. There'll be a settlement, or there'll be a trial. And us. I thought about the 12-year-old asking why I was never in the photos. The 10-year-old told I'd chosen to leave. The 29-year-old in a dress bought with stolen credit. Paige, I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted what Mom left me. That's all it ever was. She exhaled something close to a sob, pulled back under control. Okay, she said. Okay. We hung up. I didn't call her back. She didn't call me. But neither of us blocked the other's number. That was something. The settlement came 6 weeks later. The AG's investigation found sufficient grounds for civil action, trust suppression, breach of fiduciary duty, identity theft. My father's attorney did the math. A trial would be public. The filings searchable. 20 years of clients reading over morning coffee about forged documents and a stolen social security number. He recommended settlement. Grace agreed. It was the right call. The terms were simple. 1. Full transfer of 40% ownership of Cross Development Group to Jenna Cross, per Eleanor Cross's 2005 testamentary trust. 2. Both home equity lines closed, all associated debt scrubbed from my credit record. $47,000 in documented damages paid within 90 days. 3. Eleanor Cross's name restored as co-founder across all corporate documents, the website, and the lobby plaque within 30 days. My father signed on a Tuesday. Denise signed beside him. Grace told me later his hand was steady, like a man who'd finally accepted a diagnosis he'd been avoiding for years. I didn't attend the signing. I was reviewing structural drawings for a mixed-use project that evening when I checked the company website out of curiosity. There it was, updated that afternoon. Second paragraph. Cross Development Group was founded in 1997 by Eleanor and Walter Cross, her name in the same font as his, in the same sentence, 20 years after they'd cut it out. I took a screenshot and sent it to Grace. There she is. Grace replied with a single period. She understood. My father stepped down as CEO within the month, announced as a desire to focus on personal endeavors. Nobody publicly questioned it, though Nathan told me the senior partners had been briefed, and the office had gone noticeably cold. Denise never spoke to me again. I didn't expect her to. Some doors close with a letter. Others close with a signature on a settlement. Hers closed with both. Paige started texting me on the 1st of every month. How are you? Same message, every time. I replied every time. Good, you. We weren't reconciled. We were corresponding. There's a difference, and it was enough. Nathan sent me a photo in August, Paige sitting cross-legged on their living room floor, surrounded by old design journals pulled from the attic, my mother's handwriting filling every page. Sketches of buildings that got built. Sketches of buildings that never did. Notes on materials. Notes on light. She's starting to understand, Nathan wrote. I looked at that photo for a long time. My half-sister, reading our mother's journals, discovering a woman she'd spent her whole life being told didn't matter. Cross Development Group kept going, quieter now. My father still holds 60%. But the buildings don't carry quite the same weight when the name on the door includes someone he spent 2 decades trying to erase. I vote my shares by proxy. I don't attend board meetings. I don't visit the office. I have my own buildings, my own steel to spec, my own blueprints to read at 2 in the morning. The 40% was never about control. It was about correction. Some corrections take 19 years. Some take 6 weeks. Some take both. The cedar box sits on my desk now. New office, bigger firm. A corner with a window overlooking a construction site where a community health center is going up. My project from foundation to roof. It sits between my engineering license and a framed print of my first solo build. A commercial kitchen for a nonprofit culinary program. Both earned. Both mine. I opened the lid sometimes, just to smell it. Cedar and lavender, still there after 19 years. I read the front of the letter. Everything I built so you'd never have to beg. I turn it over. Ask about the trust. I framed a photo of both sides and set it beside the box. The wood's darker now than the day my mother left it on that shelf. The brass hinges have gone a little green at the edges, but the fit is still tight. The lid still closes with a clean, quiet click. My mother built things that lasted, buildings that stood through storms. A company that outlived her marriage. A trust that survived 19 years of someone trying to bury it. And a cedar box that still smells like her closet on a Tuesday afternoon in a corner office her daughter earned the hard way. My father handed me a letter meant to erase me. But you can't erase someone who already knows exactly who she is. My mother taught me that, not with speeches. With a few words written on the back of a letter I carried for 19 years without turning over. The people who try to make you small are always the ones who already know you're not. Trust yourself. The paperwork will catch up. That's her side of the story. 1 letter at a wedding, 1 cedar box, and 19 years of patience. If you've ever had to fight for something your family tried to hide from you, share this with someone who needs to hear it. This has been her side of the story for every woman who held it together alone. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.